Welcome to Streets and Eats, the podcast where we want to inspire your next trip by telling you about some fantastic destinations and the best food to eat while you're there. In fact, in this episode, we're going to lead you through our own journey to becoming foodies.
We've always loved to eat. We just didn't really know what good food was, even though we thought we did. Like most people, all we really knew was what we grew up with. For instance, in my childhood, we didn't have a lot of money. There was not really any restaurants to go to that we could afford. We had fast food occasionally. So it was all home cooked, and it was what my mom knew how to cook. She was a single mom, so as we got older, teenagers, we did a lot more of the cooking for ourselves and for the rest of the family. And we had one thing I do remember is we had a Joy of Cooking book, that really big, thick, like 600-page, really good cookbook that explains everything about the process of the recipe. And somehow in that cookbook, I found a recipe for Welsh rarebit, which is probably the most adventurous thing that I can remember from my childhood, even though really it's just melted cheese on toast.
It's yummy though.
Yeah. So, what we could make for ourselves is what we ate. With the exposure that we had growing up in the States, we ate what we knew.
And for me, I did grow up a little bit overseas, so I had a little bit more experience. When I was a small child, I went to English primary school, and they fed us lunch. So we'd have pretty much sausages. I can remember sausages every day. They smelled delicious. That's all I can remember about them. And then we also had things like fish and chips. Then we moved to Turkey, where we tried a few different things. I remember one time we had been invited to the next door neighbor's house. He was running for mayor of the town. We lived in Yalova. And he wanted to give us a treat. So they had made their famous Turkish börek, which he was making tons of to pass out to everyone in the city.
Like buying their votes?
I guess so, with food. And so we tried it, and it was spinach, and it was probably not to my 12-year-old stomach, but now I love it. In fact, I have a recipe on my website for it. But Turkish börek at the time was not really something I wanted. I was used to canned vegetables and, chili burgers and spaghetti and casseroles, because we were very big family with a very small paycheck. So that's what we ate. But we finally moved on.
Yeah. And then we both joined the Air Force at about the same age, at about the same time. I think you must have joined
a couple months after
me. Of course, we didn't know each other at that point. You went to Germany, and then I got stationed in Germany. You were my sponsor.
Unless you're military, you don't know what that means, but I was his welcome wagon.
Yeah. Yeah. In more ways than one, eventually.
It lasted, hey.
But we started traveling. We started traveling together. We traveled with the Air Force in Germany and in Europe. And right away, we were exposed to German food, which, by the way, is not all sausages. Yes, you can get a good wurst, bratwurst. My favorite were actually metwurst. But there's more than just sausages. Of course, we talked about Jaeger Schnitzel the last time. One of our favorites, of course, is Jaeger Schnitzel. And there's all kinds of different toppings you can put on schnitzel. In fact, we have a web post about that as well. Different schnitzel for every month of the year.
Because we love schnitzel. And there's lots of other German foods on there as well. One of the things we loved doing when we first got together and we lived in Western Germany was, and when I mean Western Germany, right on the edge of Luxembourg and France. And so we would go into those two countries pretty frequently, and we'd have dinner. And what we really loved to do, though, as our palates were expanding, was we'd love to find a local patisserie or boulangerie and get a baguette, or get especially the croissants, because of course a croissant, I mean, really, is there anything better in the entire world than a buttery croissant and a cup of coffee? I think not. So we did do that quite frequently. And maybe that's as far as we sort of ventured out of our own comfort zone. We still ate a lot of, German food because that's where we lived. And then, of course, we made dinner at home too, which was all American. So we weren't really stretching too much at this point in our lives. We certainly weren't going for whatever that particular local food was yet.
Right. We didn't really know that yet. And all of this, of course, was in the days before the internet. And back then, we found ourselves eating, if we were traveling, eating at tourist restaurants more often than not, because that's where we were. We were seeing the sights, so that was the first place you would be looking for restaurants.
So what is a tourist restaurant? I mean, I think we should define that for everybody, because what we consider a tourist restaurant, some of the definition is definitely probably worldwide, but some of the definition is probably our own take on it.
Like what?
Well, I mean, so what do you think of it as a tourist restaurant?
Well, for me, a tourist restaurant that I would avoid is one that is, of course, near the sites. There's usually a tout out front trying to get people to come in. Good reason not to go in a restaurant is when the tout tells you to come in. Yeah, they'll offer you things.
Free drink.
Free pisco sour, for instance, or a discounted menu item. And sometimes those are actually just scams to get you in there. So really the rule of thumb is if someone's trying to get you into their restaurant, there's a reason they don't have people in the restaurant and you don't want to go there. Another really telltale sign of a tourist restaurant is those like multi-page, huge, usually plastic covered menus with different sections for different languages, everything from Japanese, Chinese, Russian,
French,
Spanish, Italian,
and English.
English, of course, and whatever that local language is, if it wasn't one of the above. Those are good places to avoid as well. Yes, they're easy, and maybe it's a good introduction to the country where you can see if they did a good job with the translations, where you can see what is in a dish. But for the most part, it's a pretty good sign that you don't need to eat there.
Well, not only that, but typically they will have a hot dog. They will have a hamburger, a pizza, a spaghetti, all this food that transcends, the borders, that everybody eats all the time.
Food.
They're international, and it's what people want. That's what people are used to. So a lot of people, of course, want to eat that anyway, but they're not going to be good versions of it, even if you do want that.
You're not going to get the best hamburger of your life in one of those places.
No, you're not.
Quite the opposite.
And I think that one of the things that happens is, and you see this with guidebooks or sometimes on TripAdvisor or one of those sites that tourists are writing the reviews because they don't know any better. Or, like even with Rick Steves, he probably has found a good place to eat. But here's something about Rick Steves. Once he puts it in a book, once that book is published, you're never going to get in. And you don't want to wait in that line. All that's eaten there for the last however many months or years are people who have read his book. So those people are never returning to that restaurant. Yeah. And it always happens that the service then and the taste will go down because they don't have to maintain anything.
Right. They don't need the return.
I don't know enough about Bulgarian food to tell you which shopska salad is better than the next. I know I like shopska salad, and I think we found some good ones, but we didn't find them in the ones that the restaurants Rick Steves mentioned, mainly because they were too crowded to get into.
Yeah. Well, we've never followed Rick Steves' guidebooks necessarily. Just because, but we did run into that one place in Split where we had chosen the restaurant based on our own research. And we got there and found out that there was no way we were ever going to get in because it had been listed on Rick Steves and reservations weren't available for years.
So those things we like to avoid, those tourist
So did we cover the tourist restaurant? Like how to identify them, the menu, the tout out front.
The flags flying, maybe.
The flags flying, telling you about the languages they speak. Those are all really good. Now, in this day and age, it could be a tourist restaurant that's made for people who are like very interested. That's the food tourist, right? Someone who's traveling for food. And so this restaurant is geared towards that person. So that might be a little bit different, but those are pretty rare.
I don't know. All I know is I'm not a big fan of them.
Yeah, they tend to be more expensive. Like you said, they don't get the good turnover in the produce and the food that they have.
So we continue to travel, and we're narrowing down the types of places that we'll eat at. And after we sort of identified ourselves what a tourist restaurant was, then we had to figure out a way to get around going to tourist restaurants. So the first thing we did was we would start asking questions. We're pretty good at asking questions of locals at this point. If you're going to talk to me in the grocery store while I'm buying my pack of toothpaste that I need, be sure that I'm probably going to ask you where you go to eat because food is that important to me. So I always want to ask people that I'm talking to where it is that they would eat. And a lot of times, you're stuck doing that at the hotel itself or
tourist office,
a tourist office. And both of those are good places to ask. I mean, we ask every time we are out, so we can't say not to do that. However, you've got to really pay attention to the way the people are answering that question, because a lot of times they're still going to send you to the tourist restaurant. They know that every tourist who's come wants to go to this restaurant, so they're going to send them to this restaurant, and it's become a tourist restaurant. I try to explain to them, that's not what I want. I want the restaurant where you're going to go and you're going to have whatever great local food that's available. And I would say that I have a pretty good percentage of success.
It's worked out pretty good usually.
But there have been a couple of times where we're just like, oh, I should have known. You got that gut feeling like something's a little off here. I'm not sure about this one. And we shouldn't have eaten there.
Like maybe the hotel has a relationship with another restaurant. So they're going to send you to that restaurant no matter what. Yeah, that happens a few times. And like you said, you get that gut feeling. A lot of times we recognize it and we say, okay, we'll ask somebody else. Mm-hmm. Or try to break them down and get other recommendations.
That sounds like we're hassling them. We don't try to hassle them.
You do it in a friendly way as much as possible. I mean, there's no point in traveling angry. Although we see those people too sometimes. Maybe that can be another podcast. Types of travelers.
That could be a whole series.
Right?
Okay,
so yeah, you have to remember who you're asking. What is do they have a relationship? Do they know good food?
Well, like the tourist information centers, more often than not, they're not the best places to ask where to eat because they either have a canned list and they're already marked on the map, go here, because those people have paid to be on the map. So they've got a relationship with the office. Or they're allowed not to tell you any of the other ones because they haven't also paid or because they want to show no bias. In the bigger place, it's normally because it's about money. But in the smaller places that you go with the tourist information office, and there's only 6 restaurants in town, they don't want to show any favoritism to any of them. They want them all to succeed. And that makes sense because they want the town to thrive. But sometimes it will be good. It's just funny. You get different types of personality, and they'll pull you over to the other side of the counter. Right. But if I were going to eat lunch, I'd eat lunch here. So it doesn't hurt to ask. Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah. So who else can you ask? Well, as travelers, you spark up conversations in all kinds of different places. On the train into Slovenia, right? We were heading into Slovenia, to Levoča. We met a couple that were Slovenian, and boy, we milked them for information. What do we need to eat in Slovenia? Do you know any good restaurants? What should we get at that restaurant? And they were more than happy to share because everyone's proud of their local dishes. And
we were
if they
stuck
have
on
a favorite
train.
Restaurant, they love to share it. And you're on a train, so you're having conversations anyway.
Trains are great places to strike up conversations with locals to find out information.
Yeah.
So one thing that we found too is, hotel eating. Here in the States, I'm not one to go to a hotel and then eat in the hotel restaurant. Almost never. Now, if you're in Vegas, that's a different thing because then all the chefs have restaurants in the casinos and things like that.
Yeah, and I think that might be becoming more common in the rest of the states.
Well, it is somewhat in New York City
Right,
and San
in the bigger
Francisco.
cities.
But
Where you'll have a real good restaurant in a hotel.
But I think more often than not, if you're just going to any old restaurant, you're going to have just some place that's going to fill your belly.
Yeah.
And that's just not good. So we sort of started traveling with never eating in hotel restaurants as a general rule. But then, you get travel weary and sometimes you just have to. Well, we finally decided, and I can remember the time that this happened exactly. We were with our friends Lisa and Peter, who we've traveled over 25 countries with, and we were in Giethoorn, the Netherlands. Now, Giethoorn is that town that has the canals,
the electric boats.
They call it the Venice of the Netherlands,
another Venice.
Venice. And you tool around in these electric boats, and it's really quaint and beautiful and lovely. And we were there with our friends, and we stayed at this little hotel because we prefer smaller hotels as opposed to chain hotels. And they said, well, do you want to make a reservation for dinner? And at first I said no, but it was sort of a late spring time frame and it tends to be rainy. And I thought, sure, let's just do that. It was one of the best meals we'd ever had in the Netherlands. And what we discovered was in those smaller European hotels especially, the hotels really pay attention to the restaurant. In fact, they hire chefs out specifically to have a great restaurant experience as part of their hotel. So that opened up a whole new world to us as well. Now, you don't get quite the same thing in Asia or in Africa.
Right.
Or in South America. I think it's pretty much a European thing. You certainly don't get that in the United States either. I think it's pretty much a European thing. But I think it also has to do with the type of hotel, like a boutique hotel that...
Smaller family ran.
Yeah. So, I guess they could have that anywhere in the world. But that's something to look into as well.
Yeah. Well, and in Africa, a lot of times you don't have a choice.
Oh, no.
But where you're staying
eating
is
where you're
eating.
staying. It's part
and
of
luckily, in a lot of those cases, especially you look on the safaris and stuff like that, the camps, they go out of their way to have really good food. So that's a nice thing. And that's something to remember when you're looking for the places to stay is to look at
what kind of food are they going to have.
What kind of food is in the restaurant,
Our
the hotel.
Our last trip to Uganda, we had great food all except for one hotel. And that hotel, that resort, was the biggest resort, the most commercial resort that we stayed in. Everything else was very boutique-y, very family-owned.
Right.
So I think it works a lot of different ways. You just want to have that intimate experience and to have the better food, the place where they want to please their guests are the people that...
And they want them to come back.
They want them to come back.
That's really the trick to a good restaurant.
They have pride for it. If you have a more commercial enterprise, it's not a personal pride thing anymore.
Right.
So that makes a difference.
So we kind of evolved how we find places to stay, or to eat, we kind of evolved how we find the places to eat. But even though, checking out what type of menu they have, reading the guidebooks, that was things we were doing like pre-internet. Those are still good tips. They still stand true, all of them. Looking for those places where you know that they're getting good turnover of the food. Looking for those places where the locals are going. Those are all good tips, of course. But with the internet, it becomes a lot easier. Most people automatically would go to something like Yelp or TripAdvisor, or their guidebooks online, which are good. You can still do that. They still work. You're going to tend to get reviews from other tourists on those sites, unless you specifically look for the local language reviews. And then it might still be a tourist, but at least it's someone who probably is from that country and will know good food in the country.
Well, you could do it on purpose. If you're in France, you're looking for French reviews.
French reviews, exactly right.
And then, I mean, don't let the fact that you don't speak French stop you. What you're going to do is you're going to copy that text and put it into Google Translate, and it tells you exactly what they say.
If it hasn't already, which a lot of times they do.
Sometimes it'll do the page automatically, yeah. So either way. But the point is, you want people who know something about the food to review the food. Me reviewing anything to eat in Ukraine is like asking, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know anything about the food in Ukraine other than they eat potatoes. I do know that.
And dumplings.
But
they eat dumplings everywhere, so.
And chicken Kiev.
Yeah,
anyway,
chicken Kiev,
we do know a little bit about it because we've been there. But we didn't before we went.
Yeah.
And I still wouldn't feel comfortable reviewing something for their local foods because I don't know. I could review the service and I can review.
Right, but I don't know what a really great chicken Kiev is.
I know it tastes good.
Yeah. I can say if I liked it or if the service was good or if I thought the price was fair. But again, without that exposure, you don't really know. But a local person would. So I look for those. And Google Maps has gotten to be kind of my go-to starting point, because in a big city, for instance, especially, there's going to be a whole lot of really good restaurants
with lots of good
reviews, with lots of good food. So look for
what's near.
The starting point, what's near. And maybe you have heard about one really great restaurant and you want to go there regardless of where it is. But that's only going to be one meal. You're not going to go back to the same restaurant
well
every time.
You would think you will, but there are some restaurants you can't help
Some you
it.
can't resist. That's a fact. That's a fact. So yeah, you look for what's nearby on Google Maps and look for the local language reviews and use that as a starting point. But then you can also look for expat reviews.
Well, you don't know they're expats is the problem.
Yeah. On some apps like Foursquare, in some places they have a really good expat community. And that's very obvious. And that's a good one to use too.
Yeah. I think the easiest way to find out what expats think would be to go to Facebook and find the local group. So that's where you would want to look there. You would want to say, I'm going to Ankara, Turkey,
Any recommendations? Where do I have to eat and what should I get there?
Exactly.
Which is what we ask when we're in the country, when we're talking to people.
And I ask that when I'm going to just like Coeur d'Alene down the street, down I-90. Plus, just in general, I think as you begin to expose yourself, you have more of a feel for what is going to be in the country. So we walk through markets and we try and see what ingredients they'll be using, and you can see what's prevalent. Obviously, if there's coconuts in the country, there are going to be coconuts everywhere, so to eat something with coconuts in it. And we also had this sort of evolution with street food.
Street food, right?
Yeah, I think when we first started traveling, we were very
avoided
timid.
at all costs.
Yeah, we were very timid, and we were worried about deli belly, which you all get if you're going to deli anyway.
Whether you're eating street food or not.
You just have to know how to take care of it. And you just need to not be crippled by it, I think. We've all had
some
few
basic
bouts.
Rules to follow to help you find good street food.
Yes. The first thing that you want to make sure is that, there's a line. Well,
Right.
we were just in Yogyakarta right before the pandemic. And we were told that we had, on a train again, we were told that we had to eat these spring rolls from this one cart. We got to that cart. Do you know there was an hour waiting list for those things?
And people
So
were
we didn't
waiting.
get them that day because we're like, no, we're not going to wait for an hour. We went back the very next day and we waited for 20 minutes, but they were delicious. It was one of the best spring rolls I think I've ever had in my entire life, and I'll put the link to the name of it in the show notes. But it was so good, and you want to go to those places, but you
for that
just
line.
got to be looking for
You have
those
to have
lines.
the time to wait, of course.
You also want to make sure that you're, like Jim keeps saying, you want that food to be turned over. If hot food is supposed to be hot, you want to eat it hot. If cold food is supposed to be cold, you want to eat it cold. If it's going to have vegetables or meat in there or something that might go bad, you want to make sure that it's not sitting out all day before you get a chance to eat it, or there's no one been in the restaurant for hours. Remember that time we were in Taiwan? We were driving on this
Taroko
back road.
Gorge.
Yeah, we went to Taroko Gorge, and by the time we got there, it's like 9:00 at night. There was nothing open, and we were starving.
We found that one place, and they had the food out in like large round steam table trays with a little motor in the middle of it and a streamer that was spinning around and around and around, trying to keep the flies off of it.
Who knows how long it had been there?
Successful or not, who knows?
Now, that was a day we weren't so worried about getting diarrhea because, you know what? We were hungry and we were going to eat. And no one, actually, it was very good.
It was very good.
And no one got sick,
And then
so it was okay.
At least there, it was out, and you could see what looked fresh and what didn't look fresh. So we could like kind of pick and or point and shoot type thing.
And then, we also have noticed that sometimes you can't always rely on people, and you just kind of have to go with your own gut. No pun intended. Because we were in Sri Lanka one time, and we had this driver who was not the... I don't think he was okay, but he was hard to get along with. He
Seemed to have his own agenda.
He seemed to have his own agenda, that's right. And we seemed to not really see eye to eye about where we wanted to stay or what we wanted to eat. And the whole time he's saying, you basically have to go to this restaurant, you go to that restaurant. And we're stuck out there with him. So that's where we ate.
He says,
I don't think we had a good meal.
It was all tourist menus,
restaurants.
the exact type that we were talking about before. And, I kind of understand in Sri Lanka, the local population typically doesn't have a lot of the resources to go out to restaurants. So
Not only that, but drivers are getting a kickback.
And drivers get a kickback. So that's a hard one to break through. But we did finally convince him to take us to a local restaurant. And he, I think, went out of his way to find the most local place where he probably wouldn't even eat. But we still managed to have a good fish head curry there.
And then the very next day we had street food.
After we left him.
And that was delicious. And that was like we had a stuffed puri, like a elawala puri, which is vegetable puri. It was really, really good.
So now when we're going to a new country, we do a lot of the research beforehand for the food specifically. What are the local foods? What are the specialties that you have to try? And you can get a lot of this information from the internet. There's Facebook groups. Look for a Facebook group from the city where you're going. For expats, there's almost always an expat group in every city overseas.
Well, every big city.
Blogging. There's bloggers writing about food left and right. We're not the only ones out here, that's for sure. That's a good source. I don't think I've looked at TripAdvisor for food advice in at least 2 years. And even then, it wasn't my go-to. It just happened to be something that came up. So I avoid that. I'd almost rather go with a blogger, especially if they're in the local area. Again, they're like an expat or even a local writing in English, which you find a lot too. So find those local foods, find those specialties that you want to try. Make a list, like a shot list of the food you want, so that you know what you're looking for when you get there.
Call it a taste list.
A taste list. A taste list, not a taste less. But don't, that's not a finalized list. Keep it open because you're going to learn more when you get there. You're going to see more, talk to people, find out the things that they really want you to eat or that you should eat.
And one thing that we found in recent years is taking a cooking lesson pretty much right out, a cooking tour or a cooking lesson right after you get there, because you're with this person or a couple of people maybe for an hour to 3 hours, and there you can pepper them with all kinds of food questions, And that's what they're doing.
And it's their love. So
that's
they love
what
to
their
talk
love
about it.
is. So they're going to tell you where all the good restaurants are. They're going to tell you what all the iconic foods are to eat and to try. Some foods, you can't really get in restaurants. So maybe they have a way that you can go to the market and try, like a breakfast food or something like that. So I found, for someone who really, really, really loves food, that those people end up being some of our best resources.
Big time.
And so we like to really, if we're going to Russia, for example, we try to have our Russian cooking lesson as close to the beginning of the trip as possible, so that if we find out about this food that we hadn't heard about prior, we can go try it.
Right. Or a restaurant that they recommend, or
ones that they recommend you don't go to.
And that really works best if you're in their kitchen, not necessarily like a big business or a hotel. Hotels often will do cooking lessons, and they're good to learn about the food, but you're not going to get a lot of interaction with the chef or with the person that's giving you the lesson. So in their own kitchen is the best route.
Anything else on becoming a foodie?
No, like I said, a lot of the stuff we learned pre-internet still works. I mean, you might end up someplace and you don't have internet, and you still have to eat, and you want to get good food. You don't want to throw your money away at something. So yeah.
Ask the locals. Look for lines.
Avoid a tourist restaurant.
All you have to do, it's surprising, like in Paris, for example, all you have to do is go 1 or 2 blocks away from the
major
Louvre
site,
or whatever it is, and you're going to find a really good restaurant.
All right. Well, that's our show for today. Thanks for joining us at Streets and Eats, where we want to encourage you to savor the adventure. Please remember to hit the subscribe button and tell your friends about us.
Ciao for now.